Valentine, thanks for coming in, man.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so a little bit about you. So I've gotten to know a little bit about you and just come across you at the YMCA as you're working out, and heard a little bit about your journey of how you've come to know the Lord and what He brought you out of. And so my hope for this morning was to invite you on and just get you to share your story. And stories are powerful. Testimonies are powerful because people can relate to it. It's real. It's raw, and God gets glorified when we talk about what we were before Him and who we are now with Him. And so, thanks for being on, man.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, how old are you?
I'm 37.
37. Okay. So, where'd you grow up at?
Uh, I grew up in Texas,
Okay.
so it's right outside of Dallas, Irving, where the
Okay.
old Cowboy Stadium was.
Yeah. Yeah. And what brought you up to Iowa?
Well, my dad had moved up here looking for a job, and I was on drugs.
Yeah.
And
So, how old was it? How old were you when that?
see, this was in 2012 when I moved up here.
Okay. All right. So let's back up then. Tell me about your upbringing in Texas and what your childhood was like.
Super good middle class.
Yeah.
My mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
My dad, he wasn't around a whole lot because he was always working.
Okay.
So, I had two brothers,
Older, younger,
older.
two older brothers.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm the youngest. Went on vacation once a year,
Yeah.
had two cars, just your
Typical
normal.
middle class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did really good childhood, had everything we needed, probably half of what we wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything we needed, half of what we wanted. That's good. Um, so you mentioned addiction. Um, what maybe led up to that, or what caused you to kind of fall into that realm?
Well, probably around, I don't know, beginning of high school,
Okay.
I started smoking weed,
Yep.
you know. As I was getting older, I think I was probably 16, 17.
Yeah.
My dad had noticed, and he asked me to stop. He
Yeah.
said, hey, while you're in this house, I don't want you doing that.
Yeah.
And I've always respected my dad a lot.
Yeah.
So I did. I stopped. And I got a job with him working at the print shop that he worked at.
Okay.
And I was working on the press, and I got my hand caught in it.
Okay.
So I had to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
And, they gave me a prescription for hydrocodones,
Opioid.
right?
Yep.
And, and I had wanted to smoke weed, but I told my dad I wouldn't, so I
You
didn't.
didn't.
Well, and there's one night I was banging my hand all around while I was sleeping. And so I woke up the next day, and I took two of the hydrocodones instead of one.
Per the prescription said one,
Right.
and you took two. All right.
Yeah. And I remember I was with my buddy, and I was like, man, I feel high.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't get it. I didn't smoke any weed,
Yeah.
and so I found out that those pills would get you high,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a whole bottle of them. So, I started taking them, and
Yep.
they disappeared, and really didn't think about them again for a while. And I met another friend that he liked them,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a source to get them from.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd, on the weekends we go get some, get high.
Yeah. Do you build up a tolerance to it? So would you have
Oh.
to take more to actually get high?
Yep. So after I really started taking them, because I take two at a time,
Yeah.
and then it was three at a time,
Yeah.
and then four, and it got up to where I was taking 10 at a time,
Wow.
3 times a day.
Jeez. And was that just to basically function at that point, or was
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I had a job, and if I wasn't taking any pills, the operators I had would accuse me of being messed up.
that?
It was only when I was high that I could do my job and do good at it.
Yeah.
And it got to where if I didn't have them, so the withdrawals, you'd be tired but can't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
You're cold but sweating.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like a ratchet strap was around your bones, just
Mm.
someone cranking down on them.
Mm.
And it was, and that was just the physical.
Yeah.
And of course, there's, the mental part.
Yeah.
Like I imagine for today, try and go a week without your phone. Just the mental battle that.
Yeah. So are you still 16 at this point? Or are you 17?
No, so I'm 18, 19.
18 or 19. Okay, so you're taking 10 pills just to be able to function 3 times a day.
Right.
And okay, so how expensive is that, first of all?
So it's $5 a pill.
So you're spending $150 a day
Yes.
just to be able to function.
And I didn't make $150 a day, right? So that's a big problem.
Right. So how did you help supply your habit?
You ended up robbing people,
Yeah.
doing bad drug deals,
Yeah.
getting into lots of trouble that way.
Yeah. So 18, is your life starting to spiral out of control at this point?
I was holding it together, not real well,
Yeah.
but it wasn't, mentally I was with it. If I didn't have them, I could not be with it physically.
Yeah.
I was useless.
Yeah. And where's your relationship with Jesus at this point? Did you have one?
No, I mean, I grew up in the church,
Yeah.
but no, I wasn't.
You knew of him but didn't know him?
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't know anything about him.
Yeah.
Knew he died on the cross,
Yeah.
and that's about it.
Yeah. So start taking me through how did it progress into something more?
Well,
I mean your addiction. So
right.
you're taking the 30 pills a day now, and
Right. So I wanted to be clean.
yeah.
I was sick of that. I didn't have the money. I was sick of going through the withdrawals. And every time you tell yourself, okay, I'm just going to tough it out for the 2 weeks that it takes.
Yeah.
By day 2 or 3, you're just, it's terrible. It's a terrible pain. It's like having, a super COVID.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is take this pill and it goes away.
Yeah.
All of that goes away.
Yeah.
And so it's just this incredibly tough mental and physical battle.
Yeah.
When you feel like that, and there's just such an easy solution, and it's
Yeah.
just a phone call away.
Yeah.
That's tough.
I don't think a lot of people do realize, hydrocodone, oxycodone, those are legal prescribed drugs, right? But they have addictive properties. It not only mentally but physically, like you said. And I can remember breaking my leg, and they gave me hydrocodone, and I was in law enforcement long enough. I knew what they did to people, right? And so my wife basically cut me off, and I'm like 3 days from major surgery, from having this major surgery 3 days after, and she's like, yeah, you're going to be done. And I went through physical withdrawals because I'd had opioids in the hospital, in the ambulance on the way. So I had, 5-6 days where my body was used to it. And I can relate, like the cold sweats, the body in pain, like it was miserable. And I just toughed it out till the next day to the doctor, and the doctor like, whoa. There's a process for getting out. Let's wean you off of this. And, not just cold turkey, but I think a lot of people believe, since they're a prescribed drug, that they're safe and it's okay, but they're not. And the pharmaceutical companies there's been lawsuits against them, and people have won those lawsuits because they said they weren't addictive, but it's been proven they are.
Right. So I knew I would get pills from a lot of people that got prescribed them, and because they were getting prescribed, and if they didn't take them, they would go through withdrawals. Well, they thought that was their medical condition.
Mm.
So in their head, they need them.
Yeah.
Luckily, I knew I didn't need them.
Yeah.
I wanted them.
Yeah.
So I knew that I knew what I had to do. I knew what the problem was. And some people aren't that fortunate.
Yeah.
You know, they're convinced that, no, I get these from the doctor and I need them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people that start out with a legitimate injury, like a hand press or like back pain. They get prescribed, and then the life just spirals out of control because of the addiction that follows.
Right.
And so, talk a little bit more about that. How did your life begin to spiral out of control?
Well, like I said, I wanted to be clean. I knew I had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what the solution was.
Yeah.
And so I was going through withdrawals one day, and I was with another buddy. He was actually my brother's wife's brother. Well, he smoked meth. And, I'm feeling terrible, and I'm telling him about it because I got pills from his mom, too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was over there trying to get pills. Well, she didn't have any, but he did have a pipe.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I took a few hits off of his pipe,
Mm-hmm.
and the pain dulled down.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't tired. I was able to go to work
Mm-hmm.
and just work really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, this is the solution.
Mm.
This is how I can beat it.
Mm.
Yeah. So next thing you know, I started doing meth,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, work was going real good for a while. The problem with meth, one of the problems, is you do it and then you can't sleep that night.
Mm.
So then the next day you have to do more because you have to go to work.
Yeah.
And then so you do more, and then you don't sleep that night, and then you have to do more
Mm-hmm.
because again you have work.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, you've been up for 4 or 5 days,
Yeah.
and that's when you start hearing voices and
Yeah.
seeing things, and just really losing it mentally.
Yeah.
And everyone sees it around you, but you don't see it.
Mm.
This is reality. This is no. I heard that.
Yeah. Did you have people that were trying to, I don't know, tell you weren't okay?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is at this point, I would still occasionally go get pills, and so you call that a speedball, and man, it just you turn into the Hulk.
Mm.
I mean, you go crazy, you break things, if somebody says anything to you, you're ready to fight them.
Yeah.
I mean, you just get way in left field.
Yeah. What was the longest you were ever up that you know of?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks straight with no sleep.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What happened to make you finally sleep? Did your body just shut down?
Yeah. Eventually, yeah. You just,
Yeah.
hopefully you're in a safe place.
Yeah. So are you still in Texas then when
Yep.
when you're using? How old are you?
2023. Something like that.
2023.
Yeah. So eventually I lost that job.
Yeah.
And I know my boss, he knew what was going on, and he had actually worked with my dad. They had came up in printing together.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he was really upset about having to fire me.
Yeah.
I could see it.
Yeah.
But he had to look out for the company.
Right.
But he didn't want to do that to his friend's son.
Yeah.
So, he fired me. So then I didn't have a job, and I
Yeah.
had an addiction.
Yeah.
So I'm like, man, I gotta start selling dope.
Yeah.
What choice do I have?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to become a drug dealer, not being very successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew this girl, and I'd go over to her house, and she had a roommate, and her roommate had just this little spot in the corner. She didn't own a pair of shoes, and she had this little dog, and that's my wife now.
Mm.
So I did meet my wife through all this,
Yeah.
and so we hook up. Not really the way you'd think. The first time I tried to kiss her, she laughed at me. I mean, just anyway. So there was one night that I was at this guy's house, and I won't go into the whole story, but it ended up being taken hostage. by these two gangbangers.
You were taken hostage?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And it was an insane night.
Did you have a debt? Was that
No.
part of it?
So
No.
the house I was at didn't have any running water. I wanted to take a shower, so I went to his neighbor's house and asked them because he also smoked meth, and he said I could take a shower. So I go into the bathroom, taking a shower, and I hear all this commotion. Right, I'm like, and I didn't like that house. I didn't really like those people.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
But you needed a shower.
You're right, Well, and when you're living that life, you're okay with going against morals or standards.
Right.
So I get my clothes on, and I'm like, man, I'm leaving. Well, I go to open up the door, and so that was a dope house where the deadbolt had both sides was a key.
Mm-hmm.
That way you could lock the door from the inside and nobody's leaving.
Right.
Until money comes back or the dope comes back or anyway. So I go to open the door and it was locked. I'm like, what is going on? And I get pistol whipped. And it wasn't hard. It was to get my attention, and it did. Well, I turn around, he puts the gun in my face. He takes me to the back room and he says, sit here, be cool, and you're going to be okay. I said, okay. So I sat there, and there's two of them. And the old man that owned the house, man, they were beating him up bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very scary moment. So I had my phone that I had broke the day before. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. It's one of those slider phones.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to text my brother, and he didn't have a phone, so I text the guy that I knew he was with. Well, I just sent him a text because I knew my phone really well, but I couldn't see what I was sending. And I said, hey, I'm at this house. Don't come here. Like, just listen to what I'm telling you and stay away.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, they search me and they take my phone, and they took everything I had. Well, an hour, 2 hours later, a truck pulls into the driveway, and it was the guy that I had texted, telling him, my brother, don't come here.
Yeah.
Well, so they unlock the door and let him come in. He comes in, and then they beat him up bad. And then they grab his phone, and they go through it, and they read out loud the text I had sent. And I'm thinking, they're going to kill me.
Yeah.
And they were mad about it.
Yeah.
But he had my name saved under the wrong name.
Huh.
So I had let this girl borrow my phone like a week before that, and she used my phone to call him. So he had saved my number under her name. Anyway, so that night gets done. And
do they eventually just leave and you're free to go?
So they had me clean out the old man's truck because they were stealing it. And they actually had me get in the truck, and they started driving down the street. So just for earlier in the night, the guy came up to me, put the gun to my head, and he said, hey, your brother's Nathan, isn't it? I said, yeah. He said, I need you to call him, tell him everything's all right, but tell him you need him here right now. And I said, I'm not doing that. I said, that's my blood. That's my brother. Do what you have to do. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Well, and he had me cooking breakfast, because you're a, what, treating me. So anyway, they had me come with them at first. They say, hey, I want you coming with us. And so I get in the truck, and I'm just playing it really cool. Just, it's no big deal. And they drive down the street, and they say, all right, homeboy, get out. So I get out, and it was crazy, man. But a few months later, I'm in jail, and they're in jail, or one of them is. And he says, hey, you remember me? I said, yeah, it's hard to forget.
Yeah.
And he said, he gave me his number. He said, I want you to call me when you get out.
And what are you in jail for at this point?
I think it was I broke into a car.
Okay.
And so I broke into this car, and the guy comes outside while I'm in it. So I jump out. Well, my phone fell out of my pocket,
Uh,
so busted.
and so, are you looking to steal stuff to sell
Yeah,
to pay
just
for dope?
yeah.
Okay.
So I call him when I get out, and he offers me a really good deal. Say, hey, whatever you buy, I'll double it, and you'll just owe me for it. So you buy an ounce, I'll give you an ounce. And then that way I had a surplus of cash,
Yeah.
and I had a steady supply. And he was a pretty big dealer.
Yeah.
And I imagine he had a little bit of trust in me because he wanted me to give up my brother,
Mm.
right? And I told him no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that. That's just what I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I start running dope for him. And
23, 24 years old at this point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it went good for a while until, I was still stealing things, or I'd buy stolen things, or I would get money any way I could.
Yeah.
And I came across a laptop and some diamonds. And so I took it to his house. I said, hey, I have these, look at them. And next time I come back, just give me something for them.
Yeah.
And he said, okay. So the next time I came back, I said, hey, well, what are you going to give me for that? I said, what are you going to give me for the laptop and the diamonds? He said, what laptop? What diamonds?
Mm.
I said, oh, okay. I said, well, go ahead and front me that dope. So he does. He calls me wanting his money. I said, what money?
Hmm.
And anyway, he beat me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it got me pretty good.
There's no loyalty in the drug world.
No,
No.
none.
No.
None.
Yeah.
So I was walking across the street. I didn't even see him. He seen me, and he parks his car. He gets out, clocks me on the back of the head, and it knocked me out. I mean, one hit. And so I'm laying in the street. He's kicking me in the face. I get up. I thought I got hit by a car because I was walking across the street.
Yeah.
I was like, what happened? I had face running, or blood running down my face. And then I see him. He's, you owe me, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, it wasn't too long after that. I was like, man, this is not going so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was sitting there she wasn't my wife at the time, but my dad had moved to Iowa for work. My mom stayed in Texas to finish up her breast cancer treatment. And my dad was trying to get me and my brother to come to Iowa to get us.
And he knows your full-fledged addiction.
Right,
and-
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm talking to my wife, and I said, what do you think about moving to Iowa? And she said, I think that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went downstairs, and I told my mom, it's like, hey, I want to go to Iowa. The next day I was in Iowa.
Wow.
She was so ready to,
Yeah.
I have really good parents. Well, my mom just died a month ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So anyway, so then we come to Iowa.
Yeah.
And, it's supposed to be super awesome, drug-free. And we move up here. She stayed down in Atoma while I moved into this little efficiency apartment with my brother and my dad. She was living with my uncle because, I had to get a job.
What town? Newton?
I'm living in Newton.
Yeah.
She's living in Atoma.
Yeah.
So, and the efficiency apartment is one room
Yeah.
with 3 grown men.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, that was so much fun. We played cards, and
Yeah.
it was just a good time.
Yeah.
At the time, I did not like it. It was
But you're not using at this point?
no, I'm clean.
Yeah.
So, I get a job. I work as much overtime as I can. I work as hard as I can. Get moved up. Just building a life.
What year is this?
2012.
2012. Okay.
So eventually, I save up enough money where I can get my wife to, we get an apartment.
Yeah.
So we get an apartment, and that's when we got married.
Yeah.
So we got this apartment, and then we got married. Worked really hard. Got our credit in order.
Mm-hmm.
Bought a house. So, yeah, we're married, and we just move into a house, and then we get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just working as much as I can.
And are you thinking like I got to provide? Or
Yeah,
is that,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
know, and matter of fact, my wife got baptized. You know, I started.
Mm.
I'm not going to say I wasn't walking in faith, but
Dabbling in it.
I was dabbling in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it wasn't too long after my wife got baptized. You know, and we were going to church. Maybe not every Sunday, but we were going.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Well,
the
what made you guys start going?
you know, because we're having a family, and
Yeah.
you know, this type of life that I grew up in as a child.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, and that's so just kind of trying to reflect that, imitate it.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
know, like I say it wasn't. You know, I can't say that I was. You know, I was very lukewarm.
Yeah. Would you say you're a believer at that point?
I mean, I believe, but not.
Yeah.
I it's probably more I believed because I was told to believe when I was younger.
Yeah.
I didn't actually look into anything. I didn't study it.
Would you say it was more religion than relationship?
Right? Yeah, it's more religion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Uh,
So pregnant, you're working all kinds of overtime.
right. Yeah, I'm working 12-hour shifts,
Yeah.
7 days a week, and so where I worked, we didn't get lunch break. You didn't get a 10-minute break. You worked.
Yeah.
And I worked on a 3-story press, so I'm up and down ladders, and I'm signing up for every day of overtime that I can. I mean, I would go 3, 4, 5 weeks, take one day off, go another 3, 4, 5 weeks, and my knees would hurt so bad.
Mm.
And I remember I went to the doctor and I said, "Hey, I need a non-narcotic." I couldn't sleep at night; they would hurt so
Yeah.
bad. I'd end up, just banging my knees together, uh, just all night. Yeah, I don't know. But he told me no, you know. And then I had somebody working with me who he could get OxyContin,
Mm-hmm.
and so I started getting OxyContin.
Opioid.
Yep.
Yeah. What's going through your mind when, because you know what hydrocodone did to you before, right?
Right.
What's going through your mind?
I'm in control at this time.
Okay.
I need them. My knees hurt,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get anything. Ibuprofen, Tylenol, it wasn't
Wasn't enough.
right.
Yeah.
And what I needed was to lose a little bit of weight. That's
Mm.
what I needed. But I went down the OxyContin path,
Yeah.
so I started doing that, and I didn't tell my wife.
Mm.
I was hiding it from her.
Yep.
So I was, one a day turned into 2 a day,
Mm.
turned into 3 a day. Next thing you know, I'm a quarter of my paycheck, if not more, is going back to a pill addiction,
Yeah.
and it's just rising,
Yeah.
and it rising pretty quick.
Yeah. Does your wife have a red flag or anything of like, hey, where's the money going?
No,
No.
no,
You hit it that well.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, she may have known, but it's just who she is. She doesn't really question it.
Mm. Mhm.
She was because I'm the breadwinner. She's not gonna. That's just not who she is.
Yeah. So are you displaying any sort of side effects from the OxyContin that she picked up on or anybody else picked up on?
No, not really. Nothing that.
But was it getting to the point again? You're up to 6 pills at a time, or how many pills were you taking at a time of the OxyContin?
Probably 2 or 3
Two or
at a
three,
time.
okay.
So they're depending on what milligram.
Yeah.
So I'd eat between 20 and 40 milligrams at
Yeah.
a time.
And so, but you got to the point where you needed it to function normally.
Yeah, it got. I was going to control it this time
Right.
and not let it get out of hand. I was just going to take them for my knees. I needed to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it got out of hand.
Yeah.
I started taking them on the weekends. It was an everyday, and yeah, we're getting closer and closer not being able to pay bills. But I'm still working 7 days a week, and it got to the point to where if I didn't have them, I was scared I was going to lose my job.
Hmm.
I'd say I had to climb a 3-story press, and that's hard to do
Yeah.
when you got the cold sweats and You haven't
Knees are
slept all
hurting.
night.
Yeah.
And so I was like, how, and I wanted off of them.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a good husband and a good father.
So it's almost like it at some point switched to, I can be in control of it to, I know this isn't good for me.
Right.
Um,
But by the time you realize that, it's too late,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So again, I would try to go through the withdrawals, and I couldn't work. I couldn't function.
Yeah.
So again, I turned to meth.
Mm-hmm.
But this time, I was only going to do it for 2 weeks.
You're in control of it,
I'm
right?
in control. This is a solution.
Yeah.
So that she noticed right away.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was extremely quick that she noticed.
Yeah.
And we just had our baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to tell her, like, no, this is part of the plan.
Yeah.
Don't. But she wasn't listening to anything I said. She grabbed my
Rightfully
baby.
so, right?
Right. Yes. Hey, praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So she grabbed my baby and she left.
Yeah. And what's going through your mind at that point?
I absolutely fell apart.
Yeah.
But because she left, I'm not going to quit doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And
Where did she go?
she moved in with my parents.
Okay.
They took her in, and she wanted nothing to do with me.
Hmm.
Now, she's lost kids in the past.
What do you mean lost? To DHS, to death?
Right. Yeah,
Gotcha.
when she was younger, she had some kids. They got taken away from her.
Yeah.
And so we moved here. We got clean. She has a baby.
And she doesn't want that to happen again.
Not gonna happen again.
Yeah. Praise God.
Praise God.
Yeah.
And so I fell apart. I ended up losing my job,
Mm-hmm.
which I blamed her, because she left me.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I should have been allowed to make a mistake.
Hmm.
And that's just how I felt for a long time, that
Yeah.
I made a mistake and you left me and you took my son.
Hmm. And
So-
still looks like it hurts you
It
today.
does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, she did the right thing,
Yeah.
and I'm so happy she did.
Yeah. Would
More,
you s-
what hurts is just the situation that I put her
Yeah.
and my son in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I fell apart. I ended up losing my job, and I decided I was going to unalive myself.
You're gonna what?
Unalive myself, commit suicide.
Yeah.
And so, again, I've always been a believer, just not really. I thought I could trick God on a technicality, So I had set up this, it basically is a time delayed. I had a candle with the wick down inside, and I lit the wick, and then I draped a blanket over it, hanging on the wax. So then when it got soft and started melting, the blanket was going to go down into the flame.
Mm-hmm.
That blanket was wrapped around my couch that was up against my wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been up for days at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I set this all up, and I decided I'm done. I'm going to just go lay down. I'm going to go to sleep. Hopefully I don't wake up, right? My house is going to burn down,
Mm-hmm.
which is, felt like that's I don't know what. Like I said, I wanted it. I didn't want to just unalive myself. I wanted it to be
An
you know,
accident.
yeah, as an accident,
Yeah.
So anyway, I go and I fall asleep right away. Just did not, I was over it. And this girl stopped by my house, and she wakes me up and said, "Hey, I just put out a fire." I said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, no, I'm fine."
Did you know the girl?
She didn't, not somebody that normally just stops by,
Yeah.
and then she leaves me just this super sweet note. And so I don't know, that plan was foiled,
Hmm.
and I just kind of went on. But I decided that I wanted people around me. I
Hmm.
wanted people in my life. So I started selling meth.
Hmm.
And this time I'm doing pretty good. Just selling wise, I'm making quite a bit of money. I have
Hmm.
all these friends around me. Obviously superficial.
Hmm.
But that's in my head that and then I start just. It's hard to make it off of just drug dealing money. You
Hmm.
have to supplement that. You have to
Yeah.
do other crimes. And so I would do anything,
Hmm.
anything that was going to make money. I didn't care who it hurt.
Hmm.
I didn't care what it was. So I did. I mean, I'd rob people. I'd rob places.
Hmm.
I would use people's addictions against them
Hmm.
for my benefit. Yeah, I did some really terrible things.
Hmm.
Uh, I, yeah,
Yeah.
really bad things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm doing what I'm doing, and that goes on for a while.
So what year is it at this point?
Oh man, 2017 maybe,
17. Okay.
2018,
Yep.
around that time.
Yep.
Uh, so yeah, and that just goes on for a while until I was going to my grandfather's funeral, and I'd been up for a few days, but I didn't want to be high at his funeral.
Hmm.
So, and I had to drive all the way down to Albia. So, like, you know what? I'm not going to do any right now. That way I can be somewhat straight.
Hmm.
Well, I fall asleep at the wheel, and I go off into a ditch, and I hit a tree, and, I break my hand, and the cops come, and, they end up searching me, and I got caught with some dope, and I went to jail in Monroe. And I was in there for about a month. Uh,
Monroe County.
Yep, Monroe
Okay.
County. And I was in there for about a month. I ended up using a deferred. So, I got off on probation,
Yeah.
unsupervised, which was probably not the best thing for me,
Right. Right.
because I just went right back to doing what I was doing. I didn't have to check in with anybody. I didn't, you know,
Yeah.
and I start all over, doing it again.
Hmm.
Until eventually, well, because of that, DHS got involved. Because, by this time, I had had my daughter. Because there was a brief period of sobriety where me
Hmm.
and my wife started working things out,
Yeah.
and we get pregnant again.
Okay.
That didn't last very long.
Of you guys being together.
Right.
Yeah.
I went right back to using.
And she saw it.
Yeah.
And
And
she
again,
still has the attitude, I ain't getting my kids taken away.
yeah, not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, I go back to just doing what I've been doing. And, DHS is in my life. They're trying to, I'm not, get out of here, you know. Till eventually I got raided.
Hmm.
My
Newton?
yeah, my doors kicked in, and obviously they take me to jail. And I was in there for about 3 months, and this was during COVID, right?
Mm.
So I never waived my right to a speedy trial. I wanted to just, get me to prison, gas up the bus, let's go.
Hmm.
Well, I had been in there.
Why? Are you ready to be done at this point, or like you just know what's coming? And
Yeah,
you
just,
wanna go?
let's just get it over with. Let's
Yeah.
get it started so I can get it over with so I can,
Yeah.
Well, so in that 3 months, I started a Bible study, right? I'd start,
In the
uh,
jail.
yeah, in jail.
Okay.
Because of COVID, they shut everything down.
Yep.
So there was no church, there was no NAAA, nothing. So me and another couple guys were like, hey, you know what? Let's just start reading the Bible.
Yeah.
And we did, man. We started getting really into it. And, I was studying multiple times a day. Probably the most I had really ever studied in my life was in jail.
Hmm.
And of course you'd have the guys like, oh, every time you guys get locked up, you think you can turn to God. And I get what he's saying, but here's the deal. You're stripped of everything evil when you go to jail.
Mm.
So what a great place to find people.
Mm.
God is all over, and he is in jails.
Mm. Meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
Meeting people in the lowest valley, right?
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
I heard a quote, and I'm going to misquote it. But it talks about God's grace and mercy. It's like water rolling downhill from a mountain into the lowest valley, and that's where God's grace and mercy is felt.
Right.
Is when we're in those low valleys.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, that's where he'll meet you wherever you're at.
yeah. So you meet it. You do the Bible studies for 3 months.
Right. Yeah, so I'm doing that, and
First of all, how much did you get popped with? I mean, are you looking at B felony, D felony?
it was originally as a B,
Okay.
and I got caught with a loaded gun.
Yeah.
Some prescriptions that weren't even mine. I don't know how somebody left a purse there or something. It doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
altogether, originally I think it was 65 years.
Yeah.
And of course, you're gonna plead it down. You're gonna
Yep.
well, I'm doing this Bible study. 90 days comes, and I still haven't been to court.
Hmm.
Right, so I'm thinking, yeah, I beat it. They have 90 days to charge me.
Yeah.
If they can't prove it in 90 days, charges are dropped.
Yeah.
So I'm about celebrating.
Yeah.
Well, and I call my lawyer, and she's like, "Oh, I'm looking into this right now." Well, Governor Reynolds said that COVID supersedes any right that you have. So I'm like, oh, well, whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're doing this Bible study, and a buddy of mine comes in. And I don't even know why they put him in felon pod, because he's only there for the night, or for like 2 nights, or whatever it was. And he snuck in an 8-ball. And he's like, "Hey, I don't want to be caught with this. I'm leaving like tomorrow." He's like, "Here, you can have it." So instantly, Bible gets thrown in the corner. Here I am tempted. I'm really starting to do this, getting into my faith.
Yeah.
And then this bag of dope in a jail gets handed to me.
Yeah.
Right? So, of course, I'm all messed up. I'm getting high. I'm getting everybody around me high. Everyone in my Bible study got all them high.
Yeah.
And I think we'd been up for like 3 days. And they called my name. They said, "Pack your stuff." My mom bailed me out. And to see the look on her face when she saw me and she knew I was high. But anyway, so we leave.
It hurt her. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. Cause I'd been talking to her on the phone. I was telling her about these Bible studies. I had been doing push-ups, and I was looking good. I was good. I was talking good.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, he did it.
Yeah.
Let's get him out. Let's fight this so he can get back to his wife and children."
Yeah.
And so she did. She put up the money to get me out. And there I was, just
Higher than a kite.
higher than a kite.
Yeah.
And I mean, I seen it. Her heart broke. So, but we leave. And of course, I'm trying to hide it and tell her, "No, how could I? I was in jail. She wasn't.
She wasn't buying.
She wanted to believe it. She wanted to. But she's still like, well, my eyes are telling me something different.
Yeah.
So, I go back to using. I'm doing the same thing until, I'm going to drug treatment. And I can't remember exactly what. They end up pulling my bail. A few months down the road, I'm just not cleaning up.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going back to jail because they pulled my bail.
Revoke your bond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm talking to ITS. And
Integrated Treatment Services,
Yep.
which is the treatment you're going through, right?
right. And so Terry tells me that he can get, because it's COVID. We're not going to prison, not going to court, not going to prison. You're just staying in jail. You're just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he told me that he could get me transferred to Sioux City.
To a treatment facility?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'd be Jasper County property living in Sioux City.
Okay.
So I said, yeah, let's do this. And so he
And
gets
what's
it
your
done.
thought behind it? Are you thinking, okay, I can finally get cleaned, or I can get out of jail? What, or both?
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of man, I'm getting this second opportunity.
Okay.
You know, so I get transferred to Sioux City, and I'm just taking full advantage of this. I'm just super happy. Again, reading my Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I become the president of the group president.
Yeah.
Everybody knows me as like the super happy guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I finish up my treatment. I apply for the halfway house, and I go to the halfway house.
Which is where? Sioux City also?
Yeah, still in Sioux
Okay.
City. So I'm living in the halfway house. I become the president there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to AA and NA, and I have a job, and I'm going to church. I'm trying to kind of find my way.
Mm-hmm.
With my faith. And my wife is coming up to see me with my kids. Like
Mhm.
every other weekend. So
And what was it? What was that like to actually be back in your kids' life a little bit?
It was. I lived for that.
Hmm.
Absolutely, I lived for that.
Mm-hmm.
I love my kids more than anything.
Mhm.
And the sad part is that even when I was using, I would tell you that I love my kids,
Yeah.
but in no way would I show it.
Hmm.
Words don't really mean anything.
Right.
Your actions speak louder than words.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'll tell you this one. This was, back up. My son's in a diaper, still in diapers, and I hadn't seen him in a few weeks. And I go to my parents' house, which is where he's at,
Mm-hmm.
but I had just gotten a bag of dope.
Hmm.
And I walk in through the back door, and he sees me, and he comes running up to me, right? He's just, and I'm already headed down to the basement at this point, because I'm going to go get high.
Mm.
And he goes to the basement door, and he's trying to walk down the stairs with me. He's pushing his way through the door. He wants to just hang out with Dad
Yeah.
down in the basement.
Yeah.
And I put my hand on his little stomach, and I pushed him back, and I shut the door in his face.
Hmm.
And that's a super hard one for me to live with.
Hmm.
I can't imagine what went through his head.
Hmm. And the reality was the addiction was stronger than the love for your children.
Yeah,
at that point.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I getting high came first.
Yeah.
And then if I was, after I'm done getting high, you're still here, maybe I'll play with you.
Yeah.
Even though that's a terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
It's in your sweat. It's,
Yeah.
That's still being a terrible father.
That's the power of drug addiction.
It
and
absolutely.
the power of darkness that comes with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm living in Sioux City, and I'm living in this halfway house. I'm doing really good. I'm, reading the Bible again, going to church again. Right at the end of the halfway house, I also got moved into the 3/4 house. And it's like right in the transition from going one to the other, I meet a guy at work, right? And he's got just a dumb amount of pills. Like he had thousands of these Oxycontins.
Hmm.
And I knew a couple guys that I was in treatment with. They had fallen off.
Mm-hmm.
They were back into their addiction, and they had told me about it. And I was like, well, I can get these pills. Now, the price that I was getting them for, I charged double.
Mm-hmm.
This time I wasn't going to use them. I thought, you know what? I need some money. I'm just going to sell them. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to fall back into that. And I did for a little bit. And I was making a lot of money. I mean, it was probably $300-400 a day profit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, eventually you have all these pills. You take one.
Yeah.
And bam, right back into that cycle.
Hmm.
Just, I mean, almost instant. And I was like, man, I fell into it again. And then what do? I go get some meth.
Hmm.
And at this point, I'm not super into it yet, but I see where it's going. I know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
I thought, you know what? I need to go back to Newton. And so I talked to my PO in Sioux City because he was like, man, I'm going to let you go in like half the time because you know, you go to so many meetings, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. Like he was, you know, I was going to get off in half the time.
Yeah.
And I tell him like, hey, I need to go back to Newton. I miss my kids.
Yeah.
And so he puts in a transfer for me to come back to Newton. And I don't stop. I just keep using meth.
Yeah.
At this point, my wife has her own apartment, and I'm living with my parents.
Yep.
And so they kicked me out. They, you know what? We're not dealing with this.
Yeah.
And I'm on probation.
And are we talking 2021 at this point?
Yeah. Yeah. Probably around.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2020 something.
Yeah.
So I start sleeping on the bench at the library. Even during the winter, it was really cold.
Yeah.
And just this addiction just had me.
Yeah.
So DHS, you know, of course, they're in my life this entire time, giving me opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Well, finally, I do clean up for a little bit, right? And again, I crack open the Bible. I'm, you know, trying to build that relationship.
What made you keep going back to the Bible?
I don't, you know,
God?
God, yeah. You know, just trying. So I knew what the solution was. I refused to listen.
Mm.
You know, God trying to speak with me and pretty much being like, you know what? I got this. I have this under control.
Yeah. You're telling God this?
Yes. You
Yeah.
know, I was trying to do it on my own. But at the same time, trying to build this relationship, it was a very misguided, you know, attempt.
Hmm.
So I get clean, and so at this point, I'm not really allowed to see my kids. If I do see them, it's supervised. You know, it's pretty intense, and it's only like once a week. And then I clean up for a little bit, and I start being able to see my kids. Well, my PO, because I didn't have a job. When I moved back to Newton, I didn't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and got a job at Amazon. I applied. They bought me shoes, right? They gave me a hiring letter. Well, my PO violated me for not having a job.
Hmm.
And so, you know, I go to jail. I go and turn myself in. I'm like, well, I'm going to try and fight it. I turn myself in. I tell the judge, you know, hey, I do have a job. I just got it. And he said, will you send me something saying that you have that job now, and I'll let you out. And so I did. I had it emailed to him, my hiring letter, and probably, you know, like the receipt to my shoes that Amazon bought me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he lets me out the day before I had to be there for my first day. And so I go to Amazon, and I'm in a group of people. They're calling everyone's names. Well, they never called my name. And so I asked them, hey, and they look at their list. They say, oh, you didn't pass the background check.
Hmm.
You didn't get the job. And how lucky is that this huge corporation would mess up so bad to spend money on me, give me a hiring letter, and it was the only thing that stopped me from going to prison.
Hmm.
Was they had just goofed up
Yeah.
and said that they'd give me a job.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it wasn't for that, I would have went to prison.
Yeah.
Well, so I was like, man, I gotta get a job like right now. Like my PO doesn't play. You know, he's
Yeah.
he's itching to send me to prison. Like,
Yeah.
I he knew that, maybe he didn't have faith. Because I was clean for, at this time.
Yeah.
Well, so I get a job out in Des Moines. And I'm working there, doing good. Again, kind of reading my Bible every night. And
Where are you living?
I'm living in Newton.
Okay. With your wife?
I know, is
No.
with another girl.
Okay.
So, which she was an atheist. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm reading my Bible and going to work and starting to do good. I'm starting to see my kids unsupervised. I could go and pick them up before I went to work or after work, or everything's going super good. And I'm at work, and I'm walking down my press, and I look down, and there's a bag of dope laying on the ground. Now, I'm going to tell you, all the years that I did drugs, never have I found a bag of dope.
Right.
And you cannot convince me that wasn't the devil.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing good, seeing my kids, reading my Bible, trying to build that relationship. And there's just, within 2 seconds, a bag of dope in my hands, and sweat just starts running down me. I mean, because nobody knows I have it.
Yeah.
I could get high one time. Nobody has to know.
Yeah.
And I didn't for a day or two, and it ate at me, and it ate at me. And I ended up, I got high.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been clean for about 8 months. And I ended up getting into a fight with my wife. And so we're arguing, and she had grabbed my shirt, and I pushed her off me. And that was as physical as it got.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the neighbor called and said that I was on top of her, just like, punching her lights out, which, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I did go to jail.
Yeah.
So, they come and get me, and I go to jail. So, of course, my PO's going to prison,
Yeah.
Violating you, right? DHS comes up, and they said, Nolan, we're done. You're done. You're not a father. In 3 months, you're going to court, and we are taking your rights. So we've given you way too many chances.
Mm-hmm.
So I had bailed myself out of that, right? Because I was going to fight the domestic.
Mm-hmm.
But DHS said, no, we don't care.
Yeah.
You're done. We know that you got high, and we know that's why you got into a fight with your wife. And then we're done with it. You're done. Yeah. In 3 months, you're done. And I begged them. I begged them for one more chance. And they said no. And I was driving down 8th. And there was just this presence, this force telling me, I need to get into the YMCA. You need to go to the Y. I'd never even been in the Y. And so, I kind of fight it for a couple of days. And it's just this relentless get to the Y. And so I go to the Y, and I get a membership. I go in there, and they show me around. Like, yeah, I guess I need a membership. And I started working out. And I met some people, some godly men that really challenged me to grow in my faith, not just, not be so lukewarm, but to actually walk it, to grow,
Go
to
all
build
in.
a relationship. Robbie was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to the Y, and I'm going 3 days a week, probably 45 minutes at a time, looking like a goof. I've never worked out in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I would look at the machines, like, okay, this is how you do this. And that's just what I did. And, didn't take me too long. I started going for an hour, 3 days a week. And then I bumped it up to 4 days, an hour at a time. And then, an hour and 20 minutes. And then, play basketball.
And
And
are you using during this time? Or
no,
are you clean?
no, I'm clean. You know, uh, and I just went through this like transformation of I'm looking better mentally. I'm feeling better. I'm actually building a relationship with our Lord. I'm getting to know Him.
Mm.
You know, I'm not just reading the Bible in vain.
Yeah.
I'm getting to know Him.
Mm.
That's where I met Dustin
Dustin.
McConnell.
Yeah.
So where he works, I have tried getting a job like probably 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
I tried getting in there, and every time I could get an interview, but they would never give me the job.
Hmm.
Well, I talked to Dustin, and we're sitting there, talking about God. We kind of share stories, and he told me where he works. I was like, man, I wish. He goes, well, put in an application, put my name on it. So I did, and then I get a phone call, and they call me in for an interview, and I see Dustin right before I go. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm going in for an interview. So he pulls out his phone. He sends a text to HR. And I got there. They didn't even give me the interview. They gave me the job.
Hmm.
And then that's where I work now.
Yeah.
But so it's like 2 months in, 3 months in, I guess. I put on some muscle because I had been sober for 8 months. Before this, I had put on a lot of weight.
Yeah.
I wasn't
Not
looking
good weight.
Not good weight.
Yeah.
No. So I was weighing almost 260.
Oh wow.
And but I had lost weight.
Yeah.
Some muscle was coming through. 'Cause I was playing basketball, I was, lifting weights, and that court date came up. And I just kind of focused on the gym because I was going to prison and losing my kids.
Mm-hmm. And how old are your kids at this point?
Probably 5 and 4, 4 and 3.
Okay.
So yeah, that court date comes up, and DHS, they see me, right? And they said, hey, for whatever reason, we court was canceled today. It's in 1 month. We're taking your rights in 1 month. So I just kept doing what I was doing, going to work, going to the gym.
Did you have hope that you were gonna keep your
No.
kids, or was it just like you had reconciled? I'm losing my kids.
Yeah, I'm losing my kids. And at this time, I'm still trying to fight the domestic charge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that month went by, and I go to the court, and I'm talking to DHS, before the court, and they say, hey, we had to push it back another month. So I just kept doing the same thing, man. I just kept going to the gym, building my relationship with God, and God He started putting all these people in my life, right? Just surrounding me with these godly men, and I can't go a single day without getting into a conversation about God.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, my life is just surrounded with this now. It's the armor,
Mm.
really, really putting it on. And
There's strength in community.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that month goes by, and I go to the court, and they said, hey, why don't you spend a little bit of time with your kids?
Mm.
And so I, got back on supervised probation. And then eventually it turned into unsupervised. And I'm talking with Robbie a lot at the gym. He challenges me to read I can't remember what book it was. Colossians, maybe. It's a 4-chapter.
Okay.
Anyway, he said, I want you to read that every day for 1 month, for 30 days. He said, we'll meet up here Wednesday, and we'll talk about it every Wednesday. But it's the same book. I want you to read the same 4 chapters every day. And so I did. I'm like, well, that's stupid, just read the same book. And every day I read it, the same 4 chapters, I got something new out of it.
Yeah.
Every single day. It never stopped.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I got from it was, it says conducting yourself as you were as of you were a citizen of heaven,
Mm.
right? So it really made me think, like, would I be doing this if I was in heaven right now?
Mm.
Would I be looking at her
Mm-hmm.
if I was in heaven? Would I be talking like this if I was in heaven?
Mm.
And the answer, most of the time the answer is no.
Yeah.
But it really just got me thinking and kind of really sent me down this path of, hey, you need to be better.
Mm.
You need to be better than what you are.
Mm-hmm.
And
And there's one way to get there, and that's through Jesus.
that's right.
Yeah.
So, and I'll tell you this to your point. I went to NA and I went to AA and I went religiously through all these times of sobriety.
Yeah.
I mean, going to sometimes 2 or 3 meetings a day. And the thing about it is they tell you you're an addict, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm here to tell you that Jesus is the cure.
Mm.
You don't have to be an addict.
Yeah. He makes
he
you
took
into a
that
new
away from
creation,
you.
right?
Yeah,
That's 2 Corinthians 5:17. The old life's gone, a new life has begun.
right.
Right? He can change you into something new, and that's in his image, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he does.
Yeah.
So this was, back when I was in jail and I was talking with a therapist. And, so obviously I was in jail. I gotten sober for a month, 3 months, however long it was. And I was talking with them and I'm telling them just all these bad things I've done. I stole my mom's wedding ring when she was sick with cancer and pawned it.
Mm-hmm.
I've really hurt people. I've just done these terrible things. I've hurt my kids, mentally, emotionally. And every time you get sober, you have to live with the things that you've done. Because, there's a difference between sober me and high me.
Yeah.
High me, I don't care. I'll do anything.
Yeah.
But I do have a heart, especially when I'm sober. And so getting sober, you have to live with the things that you've done. And they just come flooding in. And, it's easier to be high.
To escape it.
Yeah.
To escape the guilt. To escape the
Absolutely.
shame.
Yeah, because
Sure.
you're just as guilt and shame and, how could I do this?
Yeah.
But when you're high, you don't have to think about it.
Right.
You just keep doing
It's
it.
a temporary escape.
It is.
Right. Key word is temporary.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so he said something that was so awesome that I really used to build my foundation. Because he knew I was a Christian.
Yeah.
And he said, Nolan, have you asked for forgiveness?
Mm.
Yeah, I have. Of course. And he goes, okay, well, did God forgive you? I said, yeah, I'm sure he did. And he goes, well, then who are you? What makes you better than God? That you're holding this against yourself when he said you're forgiven.
Yeah.
And I just never thought of it that way.
Yeah. That you bring up such a good point, and I preached on this one time of there's this phrase that I just can't forgive myself. And it's like, have you really wronged yourself? It's not a matter of forgiving yourself. It's accepting the forgiveness that Christ offered you with his death on the cross, right? It's accepting that because you didn't wrong yourself. You wronged him.
Yeah.
And he says you are forgiven. You just need to understand the truth and the truth of his forgiveness.
That's right.
So I agree with that, man.
Yeah. And it just, and when he said that, he said, well, who are you then? And I just felt this weight that doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
I don't have to. I have been forgiven.
Yeah.
Who am I? If God says I'm forgiven, who am I?
Yeah.
And so that didn't get me sober right then, but it did kind of lay that foundation that,
Yeah.
You don't have to be an addict. You don't have to be a criminal. You don't have to be a terrible father or a terrible husband.
Yeah.
That's maybe something you did.
Yeah.
It's not who you are.
Doesn't define you.
You're made new.
Yeah.
The spotless lamb was sacrificed for you.
Yeah. Praise God.
You have been made right with God.
Yeah. So you start having your unsupervised visits and you start getting to be a father
Yeah. And so after the gym and before work, I'm going and I'm going over to my wife's apartment, and we eat family dinner. We're praying before we eat, and before I go to work, I kind of sit on the ground with my kids, and I don't know how my wife knew, but if 'cause I didn't tell her, but if I worked my shoulders out, she would start rubbing my shoulders. If it was my back, she would rub my back. She knew what I had been working out,
Hmm.
and she would rub it. And listen, I didn't think that we would ever. I loved her so much, and when she left, it hurt so bad that it got to a point where I had to hate her
Mm,
in order to move on.
mm,
And there was no way we were ever going to get that back. We were never going to rekindle this. It just couldn't ever be as good as it once was.
Mhm.
We had ruined it. Right? So, but that's not the way it worked. We fell in love all over again,
mm.
and we put Christ first.
Yeah.
Every day I don't live to please my wife. My focus is to please the Lord, and by default, you will please your wife.
Right. It's that overflow.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's good. And I think some of those you talk about, you could never love again, but this time being filled with God's love, right? Scripture
absolutely.
says God is love. And so being filled with God's love, you can actually love your spouse
Yeah,
with God's love as opposed to, physical love or a more of a fleshly love or earthly love. But man, yeah, when Christ is first, it's God's love.
yeah,
That's
it
amazing.
and it's truly love.
Yeah,
Whereas before, it's probably more lust than it was love.
yeah,
But doing this with that triple braided cord,
mm,
it's different,
yeah,
and it's so strong, and just it's better than it's ever been.
yeah,
And listen, I've really hurt my wife. I've done some terrible things to her,
yeah,
and but it's different now.
yeah,
And our relationship is so strong, and just we do everything as a team, and we're hardly ever together.
mm,
We work different shifts. But we are still operating as one.
yeah. So what's it been like being a father that puts Christ first?
W-
So meaning, like you talked about, you live to please the Lord, right?
Right.
You live to please God. So that made you a better husband, and I'm gonna say it's probably made you a better dad.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, just the other day. So I have a son and a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like the father-daughter relationship is something that's really special.
Hmm.
I don't know if you have.
I have two.
Right. So right? And it's
How old's your daughter?
she is 6,
Okay.
and it's that relationship is something that we missed out on,
Mm,
because I don't remember her being 1.
mm,
I don't remember her being 2. I was not in her life for the first half of it.
yeah.
It was just her mom. So when I did come back into her life, she was she's still kind of iffy on it.
Mm-hmm.
She's a lot better now. But, she used to tell me, she said, nobody loves you. She said, I only love mom. And it breaks my heart that I did that to her.
Mm,
That because I said that father-daughter bond is something so special.
yeah.
And it's something that I'm convinced the Lord will give me.
You can reconcile.
That, yes,
Yeah.
and we will.
Redeem
It's
it.
just going to take some time.
Yeah.
That I've really messed up.
So how long have you been clean?
Probably 3-4 years.
Yeah.
I really don't keep track of my date.
Yeah.
Uh, I know it was August. I couldn't tell you what year.
Yeah.
I said it's 3-4 years ago. I said I'm not an addict, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really.
So how do you battle the temptation now? Do you get tempted now, or do you feel like God's lifted that from you?
Yeah.
And like because some people combat temptation in different ways. How I guess how do you battle that temptation, or what do you do to maybe even keep the temptation at bay?
You know, so I wear the armor of God.
Mm.
Uh, so, you know, every time that I've started to walk this path, the devil comes in and tempts me.
Yeah.
I mean, the devil tempted Jesus Christ, right?
Right.
He's definitely going to tempt you.
Right.
uh, so, matter of fact, I was at work, and a guy that I was working with, he was high.
Mm-hmm.
And now me and him have talked. He knows my story, and he's working on my press, and he was high. And you know, I shut the press down. And I said, "Listen, tomorrow you will either be sober or you won't have a job."
Mm.
I said, "I don't want to do that to you, you know, because I like you."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "But right now, what you're telling me is that you don't care about me, you don't care about my wife, and you don't care about my kids. Not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Be sober tomorrow." And he was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he respected it. But, you know, so I'm just not going to, I feel like I have the strength now
Yeah.
to spot the temptation.
Yeah.
And just, you know, I'm not doing that.
So you talk about working out, getting stronger in the gym, right? It takes time, takes hard work.
Right.
I mean, you have to commit to it. And I tell people too, like the moments I was strongest in my life is when I had a spotter or a lifting partner, right? People to push me.
Yeah,
And I think it's the same in a spiritual walk too, right?
absolutely.
Got to put in the time in the Word, time in prayer, time in fellowship with other believers, those spotters, right? Those people that are going to push you in your walk. And so that's why being in Christian community is so important too. And, you know, you talked about the importance of godly men just being around you and
Yeah.
helping push you. And so, what would you say? I want to give you the opportunity to speak to, let's go back to when you were a youth. And you started with maybe just weed, right? But then pain pills and eventually meth. What would you say to a youth that maybe is tempted to start with weed because it's just weed? What would you tell them?
That it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
That it doesn't do anything for you.
Right.
It doesn't. It makes you hungry. It makes you lazy. You know, and yeah, it's just, what benefit would you get out of it?
Right.
You know, before you do anything, you should think about, well, what is this going to do for me or
Yeah.
to me?
Yeah.
Am I going to benefit from this?
Yeah.
You know, going to the gym, yes, you're going to benefit.
Yeah.
Smoking weed, you are not.
Right.
You're, you know, probably going to fall asleep. You're going to spend some money on a pizza. You know, it's,
Yeah.
what is that doing?
Right. Right. And then, you know, you were offered the opportunity to use meth as you were looking for pills. What would you say to a young man or a young woman that is faced with that temptation for the first time of, you know, take a hit?
Man, if there was a young person, man, I'd really just try and put God in their life,
Yeah.
because that's what, you know, obviously that it scares me to even think about. Okay, I know it's out there, and I know that's probably happening right now.
Yeah.
That somebody is throwing their life away,
Yeah.
and you know, not everyone gets out the way I did. There's a guy I know that, I mean, we're almost the same person.
Yeah.
Same exact situation. He had a kid. He doesn't have his kid anymore. He
Yeah.
didn't make it out.
Yeah.
And he's sober now.
Yeah. Some people lose kids. Some people lose families. They lose friends. They lose jobs, careers. They lose, you know, homes. They lose. Some lose their life.
Yeah.
Lose their freedom by going to prison. Like the addiction will ruin your life. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You will end up sleeping on a bench at the library.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say? So that's to the youth. Find Christ over
Yeah,
dope,
absolutely.
right? And don't even, you know, don't even try it. Don't even give in to that original temptation
Yeah.
to try. Um, what would you say to someone your age or my age right now that is using to escape the pain? Maybe I know people that have used because they've lost a loved one and it hurts so bad that they just want to escape
Right.
temporarily,
Yeah. Yep.
and then they get sober
It's a
and they have to
temporary
deal with it,
fix. Yeah.
right? Or they're using it because they've lost their kid or a job or they need to stay up for work or whatever it might be. But they're using it just for a temporary escape or solution. Um, what would you tell them? Like, what would you say to them? Like, um, yeah,
So, and I have met these people, and and I'll kind of share my story a little bit if I think it'll help.
yeah,
Uh, and I try to let the Holy Spirit do the talking,
yeah,
you know, because I screw things up, you know. But so just try to live to God's will and let the Holy Spirit speak. I'll invite him to church, invite him to a Bible study to,
yeah,
just try and just plant that seed
yeah,
because whether they do it or not,
yeah,
that's what they need.
yeah,
Especially if they are doing it,
yeah,
that's the only way out. You can again have a temporary fix
yeah,
by going to meetings, by going to. That's not fixing it though.
right,
That may help you out for the hour or for the day,
yeah.
but Jesus will help you out for life.
They call him the great physician for a reason,
Right.
right? He can heal you. Well, testimonies have power, right? And so, thanks for being willing to share your story. People in the midst of addiction, like you have a connection point with them that I don't, right? I can tell them this is what I've seen, and how people have, hit rock bottom, but you've been there, and they can say, "Wow, Nolan, he was at rock bottom. I'm at rock bottom, but now I see him, and he has a job, he has a wife and kids he's a part of, and he's in here working out, being healthy. Like I can have that."
Right. Anything's possible,
Yeah,
but you really need God in your life, and you need that relationship. You have to walk it.
yeah. I want to touch on one more thing because I ran into you at the Y one time, and I asked you how your week was, and you kind of stood there for a minute, and you're like, "It wasn't good." And you told me about you said I engaged in some sin. I knew it was wrong uh, before I did it and when I did it, and then you said afterwards I had never felt so far away from
Yeah,
God.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I just felt this separation
yeah,
because I knew walking into it that this is sin,
yeah,
and yeah, and it felt terrible just having that separation, just that and I feel like that's what Jesus felt when he was on the cross,
yeah. But
and
what
he
did
was
what did you do after it? I mean, because it could have been like you could have felt the separation and ran
right.
from
No,
God.
no, I turned to God.
Yeah,
I prayed.
yeah. Repentance is turning to God,
Right.
right? You prayed.
Yep.
Did he meet you there?
He did absolutely.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. God's word said he never leaves us, he never forsakes us. And he's a forgiving God full of grace and mercy. And Paul says he doesn't give us grace so that we can justify our sin or go on sinning, right?
Right.
But he is full of grace, which means when we do sin, we repent and we turn back to him. He's there. And he's loving and he's perfect love. Um, and so I would just encourage people, if we all sin. I mean, we sin every day, but where are our hearts at, and do we turn back
Right.
to God?
I'll tell you just one more small testimony,
Yeah,
but this was very recent where I'm working, and yeah, I run a printing press, and nothing was going my way. Nothing. Every day, the press was breaking, or the jobs I was getting, there was something I couldn't run it, and to where I was writing it down, like with the times and what happened, and 'cause I thought that they're gonna talk to me about all this downtime that I have,
Yeah.
you know, and they did. And matter of fact, they put me on what's called a PIP.
Performance
And
improvement plan.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I was so scared that I was going to lose my job, and I showed them the list that I had. I'm like, list, what can I do about this? And they're no, we don't want to look at it. You have to improve.
Yeah.
And so every day I was praying before work, at work, after work, and just nothing was really changing. And as I was asking God for what I thought was all the right things, give me the strength, give me wisdom, give me, get me through this day, give me what I need to do this. And I wasn't really getting anything. Nothing was happening. And every day I was scared. I was scared that I was going to have to come home and tell my wife that I don't know how we're going to pay the bills. I don't know how we're going to eat. And I was so scared. And one day I get off of work, and it was a terrible night. And I fall to my knees, and I'm crying, and I'm praying. And I tell God, I'm ready for whatever your plan is. I'm ready. Like if I'm not supposed to be there, let's do it wherever you want me. Let's go.
Yeah.
So I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
And the very next day, everything changed.
What do you mean?
Everything at work. I've gotten raises and promotions and just everything. When I gave in to God's will, because before I was asking God to let me control it.
Yeah.
Let me control this. Give me what I need so I can do this. And that's kind of been my problem my whole life.
Yeah.
Right? It was I got this.
Yeah.
But the second I fell to my knees and I said, look, I'm getting out of the driver's seat. I'm gonna get in the passenger seat, and I'm ready for wherever we're going. And everything changed.
Praise God.
Praise God.
Yeah. But it took surrender.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thank you. One of the things I appreciate about you is, I see you in the gym every now and then, and you're always talking to someone. You're always talking to someone. You're engaged with them, and you're relatable. And I think people enjoy talking to you. And it seems like you're always willing to share your story. You're always willing to tell others about what God's done in your life, and
Right.
you're a walking testimony. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Yep.
And I think as Christians, a lot of times we can, the more years we've been walking with Christ, we can almost get lazy in our evangelism, and we can almost not care about other people knowing the Lord and hearing how He's worked in our lives. Or sometimes I think we forget how He's done all these amazing things in our lives. And so, I appreciate you always being willing to share.
Absolutely.
So, would it be all right if I prayed for you?
Please.
All right, man. Let's do it. Father God, I want to thank you for this time in this space, Lord, and this opportunity to hear a testimony, Lord, hear how you've moved and worked and forgiven and rescued Nolan in this life here on earth, Lord. And you've brought him to this place of surrender, and you've brought him to this place of where he's experienced your forgiveness. He's experienced your goodness, your love, and your joy, Lord. And in return, you filled him with the fruits of your Spirit so that he can share it with others, Lord. Lord, I thank you for every bad experience, every I don't know, just bad result of decisions that he made, and the consequences that came with that. Thank you. because it's led him to where he's at today, Lord, and it's given him connection points with other people to share with them and to show them you can be at the lowest of lows and God's there. And God, you were there, and you were pursuing him. And we thank you that when he turned to you, Lord, you were there, and you rescued him. And so, Lord, I just pray that you continue to use him. Lord, he talked about the armor. I pray that every day he can put that armor on. I pray that the temptation that comes, Lord, that you will always show him a way out. And that way out's through you, Lord. And I pray that his family will be impacted by his relationship with you, Lord, that his wife will get the overflow of the love that you fill him with, and his children will get the overflow of the fruits that you fill him with, Lord. And in that, they will forever be impacted. And Lord, so we just pray that you are present in their home, and that you will be the leader of their home, and that Nolan will be the spiritual leader of his home, Lord, and his kids and his wife will be forever impacted because of that in a way that honors and glorifies you, Jesus. And so, again, thank you for him. I pray for protection over him and his family and his home, Lord, and may just you continue to use him as a light in this world. I pray this all